Garage Warrior Podcast, and I'm so excited to have on the show today Abel James, the Fat Burning Man. We're going to teach you how to become a fat burning man yourself on this podcast. Abel James is a nutrition expert and a really awesome dude. So without further ado, let's take it over to my interview with Abel James.
Abel James, the Fat Burning Man, thanks for coming on the call today. How are you doing, my man?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Tyler.
My pleasure. I'm really excited to have you on the call. For those of us who don't know anything about your story, Abel, why don't you give us a little bit of background on kind of where you started and how you came to where you are as the Fat Burning Man?
Yeah, you bet. So I've always been really interested in health in general. I was raised that way. My mom's a holistic nurse practitioner, and she had her own practice for a while. And anytime I got sick when I was a little kid, she was rubbing me all over with smelly balms and tinctures and just kind of weird herbs that she was wagging in my face. And so I've always kind of had a slant toward alternative thinking when it comes to diet and health. And that led me down the path of being a vegetarian on and off for years. And that was fine for a while, but once I got into my 20s, I started gaining weight. I definitely had some gut issues, although I didn't know at the time. Started to have inflammation, weight gain, and all these issues that I had never had before, like, kidney stones was one that was just absolutely terrible and ruined my life for a while. My brother also. And so it all came to a head when I came home one night and my apartment building and everything I had was up in a 30-foot wall of flames, just completely obliterated, gone. And it was after that my health really went downhill, gained some more weight, was feeling really down about myself, trying to get my life back in order. And I decided that with all these things out of my control, the one thing that I really could focus on and learn about and kind of master was my own health and learning about the truth behind all this stuff. And once I started digging into research in medical journals and all of that, I found that the truths that were espoused to me as a vegetarian weren't necessarily in line with reality. And I learned a lot of other things that are completely counter to what you'd read in traditional diet magazines or fitness magazines when it comes to losing fat and gaining muscle. And they actually came from more like the underground bodybuilding circuit, not the drugs, but the actual protocols that they have when it comes to training and diet. And that led me down the path to today, which we can talk more about as you'd like.
Awesome. I was a vegetarian too for several years, and I did pretty fine on it, but my wife ended up getting just terribly sick.
Really?
We ended up going to a functional medicine doc, and they were like, you got to eat meat. And within 2 weeks, she was 100% fine. I mean, they're ready to take out part of her colon, right?
Oh, my gosh.
So it's amazing, and you're just so right. The truth in this stuff is so different than what you really, really think it is or what you're led to believe it is. Well, what prompted you to share your story with everybody? Because you started learning after your house went up in flames. What prompted you to really spread the word?
I think it was as I was learning it, I decided to write a book about the things that I had learned. And they're so, like I said, they're so different, completely opposite of what I was trying to do before, which is low fat, right? Low fat, high carb, lots of healthy whole grains and all that nonsense, which turns out not to be the case at all. And so it was when I found these things out and really accepted them as my own truths, and then experienced the crazy results, crazy good results that happened after I worked them into my habits, I decided that everyone needs to know this. There's so much misinformation put out there about, the good things about grains or the bad things about meat, bad things about fats. Now what I do when I wake up in the morning is I have heavy cream in my coffee. I eat butter by the stick sometimes when I'm really hungry and I don't have other options. I am spooning coconut oil into my mouth. I'm eating so high fat. And my doctors, even as far back as before I fired the traditional doctors that I had, when I'd walk in, they'd be like, wow, your biomarkers are absolutely off the charts, fantastic. What are you doing? And I'd tell them, I'm eating tons of fat, I'm doing all this stuff, and they're just like, oh, it can't be that. You need to stop that immediately. Right? So I decided to spread the word because obviously if doctors aren't going to do it, if conventional media isn't going to do it, someone needs to. And it's people ask me, my friends are just like, wow, what did you do? You look so much better. How can I do this? And so it was just kind of that. It was trying to tell people on a large scale. And the reality is it's so cool, like you're doing with your podcast. It can be as simple as talking on the phone or like sitting at your desk, and you can reach literally millions of people. I feel like it's kind of my duty, and one of my talents is, talking to people. And so having an interview show about stuff that I really care about and I think the world needs to know just seems like a natural fit.
Absolutely. Well, we're all grateful that there's so many people out there sharing what they've learned. And I think that anybody with a decent, interested mind is really coming to the same conclusions as when they really dig deep enough. So that's pretty cool.
Totally.
So what does a fat-burning man eat, and how does that differ from the mainstream?
Yeah, so as I was touching on a little bit earlier, it's not typical eating, which is fine because it's way more delicious. And I was actually talking to someone else pretty recently, and you can probably relate to this too. When you're a vegetarian, like, that's hard, right? It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort, and the payoff isn't always there. And so when I compare the way that I eat now to the way that I was trying to eat before, which was healthy, like when I would have pizza, I would try to get a whole wheat crust, and I would take paper towels or napkins and put them on the top to like get all the grease off. That was, that was like healthy eating for me, which is totally absurd, in retrospect. But this is so much easier. So on a typical day, often I won't eat in the morning. Some days I will if I'm really feeling hungry or if I worked out hard the day before. But often I won't eat until 10 in the morning, usually around like 12 noon is when I have my first meal. And I totally love eggs. I'm all about them. I have them a little bit of heavy cream, bacon fat, avocado, and I tend to have a green smoothie at least a few times a week, which for me, I love kale. There's some apple in there, usually just water, maybe a little bit of stevia, some cinnamon, cacao nibs, other fun stuff that you can throw in there like flax, all that. And then for dinner, I think compared to most kind of like paleo ancestral people, I'm heavier on the fat for sure. So I'll have like fatty cuts of meat, or I'll have a little bit of a beef liver, or I love chicken wings from pastured chickens and that sort of stuff. So, I mean, it's a really fun way of eating. I finish it off with dessert, which my girlfriend Allison, we actually just put out a dessert cookbook. So we've been eating tons of like rum balls and cheesecakes and chocolate concoctions for the past few months.
That sounds fantastic.
Which has been awesome. And I mean, I haven't gained weight. Actually, I've gained muscle. And you can really eat some pretty amazing stuff as long as you're doing it in this specific way, which is
right.
You can't have your conventional cake and eat it too. You know what I mean? So
sure.
All of this backfires if you're still shoving, like little Debbie's down your throat.
Right. So it sounds like the root foundation to what your approach is just eating real food from nature in the highest quality you can.
Yeah, that's right.
That's awesome. I love that. How important to you is high quality food when we're looking at, if it's organic, if it's all natural, if it's grass fed? Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll just start by saying personally, I hardly ever stray from that. I try to eat the highest quality foods every single time I put food into my mouth, and I encourage everyone else to do the same. And actually, that was in my own experience when I went from being overweight to being like totally ripped. That was the biggest change that I made. It wasn't even, like eating more fat or eating more protein or less carbs or anything like that. It was changing the way that I thought about the quality of my food. Because when you go into the supermarket, pretty much all that stuff is junk. If you stick to the outside of the supermarket and you're looking at the fresh veggies and produce, especially organic ones, if you can find grass-fed meat, this stuff is what's really going to make the change for you. Your body can't really absorb nutrients from all these crappy protein shakes, protein bars, synthetic vitamins. Usually have a hard time in your system. Your body doesn't really know what to do with them. And so what they have is like all these dead foods with vitamins sprayed back in. And these are vitamins that, like I said, your body might not be able to absorb. You compare that to eating like an apple or kale from your backyard. And this stuff, your body knows what to do with it. It knows how to assimilate the the nutrients from that food. And as a result, you're going to feel better. You're going to look better. You're going to, and a lot of people ask me about cleansing and detoxes. Your body is built to do that. It's supposed to do that on a daily basis, not on some like crazy, 10-week long juice fast. It's supposed to be doing this constantly. And what eating high quality foods, especially roughage and veggies, allows you to do is do that constantly. So you're constantly having a clean system. That's what you really want to do.
Sure, that's awesome information, and people really do need to think about where they're getting their food from. My favorite phrase when I'm consulting with people is, you are what you eat. So if the cow eats garbage and you eat the cow, you're still eating garbage, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So you got to get that high-quality food in. You mentioned having bacon and eggs and stuff for breakfast, and you're singing to my heart because I have that every day for breakfast as well. Or not every day, but most days for breakfast I like to have my bacon and eggs. But what about cholesterol? What about saturated fat, Abel? What are we to do about that?
Well, I think everyone just needs to relax a little bit because these things that everyone's worrying so much. And all of this stuff is kind of new in the past 50 years or so, the saturated fat cholesterol thing. And I'll just go ahead and say it. The research that supposedly shows that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease is not there. Like, I did psychological and brain science and research when I was an undergrad at Dartmouth, and what we specialize in is looking at the sort of research. And so when you take that eye and you look at where we got these conclusions from when it comes to saturated fat and cholesterol, it's all fabricated nonsense. Like, everyone is freaking out about cholesterol and saturated fat. And it turns out that it's all kind of unfounded. And so, frankly, I don't worry about it at all. I worry about eating real food. And the fact of the matter is that science is so far behind nature when it comes to this sort of thing. We can take the cookie and we can incinerate it, and we can measure how many calories are within that cookie. That says nothing about the actual cookie itself and what's in it and what happens to it when you eat it. So that's why it always comes back to eating real food. 50, 100 years ago, 10,000 years ago, we wouldn't be worried about cholesterol or saturated fat. So I encourage people, as long as they're eating real food, to not really concern themselves with those numbers too much.
Awesome. And, it's so funny to me, too, that the trade-off that you see most people do is they eat low fat, so instead they're going to eat pastas and breads and, it's a low-fat gummy worm or whatever.
It's healthy.
It's healthy. Well, that happened to me personally. I was like 16 years old, and I thought I found the key to losing weight because I was a chubby kid. And it was, if it doesn't have fat in it, then you won't get fat. And so I remember buying a 5-pound bag of gummy worms and going to town.
Wow.
So it's wrong.
Yeah, that happens too on a more sinister level when you watch the commercials from Yoplait and Dannon and all these, like yogurts, which have zero fat, zero cholesterol. And you look at it, it has either, like 35 grams of soda in this tiny little 100-calorie yogurt, or it is packed with like these GMO, ridiculous artificial flavors and sweeteners. And this is something that's supposed to make you skinny and healthy.
Right,
and it's
right.
Absolute 100% crap. So,
while you mentioned it, you just mentioned GMOs, and I'm out of California, and the law just got denied, and I just wanted to touch on that. What's your take on GMOs?
Oh, I don't touch them. I just did a show about that with Jeffrey Smith, who did a wonderful documentary called Genetic Roulette, which really, if people don't know about GMOs, I would highly encourage you to learn about it. Don't take my word just to not eat them, because that's really hard. Actually, take a look at why not, because this stuff is freaky. And like I said, science is so far behind nature, we don't really know what we're trifling with right now, but I can say that in almost 100% of cases, and maybe 100% of cases, the primary reason that these foods are genetically modified is not for your health. It's to increase profit for the chemical companies, for the food manufacturers, and it's often detrimental at the price of your health. And so as far as, the California thing is a bummer, but that's what happens when Monsanto and all these other chemical companies can raise $47 million to put toward a misinformation campaign compared to $7 million, which is what, the anti-GMO labeling movement was able to raise. And so right now, I think people like you, other folks who are in these channels that aren't dominated by special interests, Monsanto's and the media of the world, we can kind of spread this message, continue to lead healthy lives by example, and I think people will catch on that GMOs aren't something that we want. So I highly encourage people to kind of learn about all the freaky stuff that's in them. It's, if I said it, you wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's wild stuff. Jeffrey Smith has got some really great information out there.
He does, yeah.
So you kind of touched briefly on the fact that you kind of wake up, but you don't have any breakfast, right? And so I thought breakfast was the most important meal of the day. What's your take on that?
I used to think so, too. I used to wake up in the morning and shove breakfast into my mouth, even though I wasn't that hungry, just because I thought it was the most important meal of the day and that my muscles would fall off as soon as I stopped eating everything. And actually, I'm writing a book on fasting right now, a short book, and I just put together pictures of myself because I took pictures of my body before I started fasting, or really started incorporating it into my lifestyle, I should say, and now with fasting heavily incorporated into my lifestyle. And all I mean by fasting is just like skipping a meal every once in a while. Occasionally, maybe once a month, once every 2 months or so, I'll do a 24-hour eat nothing fast. But generally, it's just skipping a meal. So what these photos show is me putting on 15 to 20 pounds of pure muscle after I started fasting.
Wow.
Not only did my muscles not fall off, but they're way bigger now. I'm much stronger, and I feel better. I feel, as oddly as it sounds, like leaner. And you can kind of see it in my face. Like, I'll get puffed up if I overdo it for too long. You can kind of see that in bodybuilding circles too. If you overfeed for too long, then you just kind of like get puffy. You might get strong, but you also get kind of puffy. And so what this allows you to do is balance that out. You know, some days I eat a lot. I've always loved food. And other days, you know, when I'm not that hungry, I just don't eat that much. And that's fine. You know, if I can go, some days, you know, I won't even eat at all until 3 p.m., sometimes even 6 p.m. And it's not a big deal. As soon as I eat again, I'm like, wow, this food is delicious.
Right.
But I don't miss eating it for the rest of the time. It's actually kind of liberating.
That's awesome. I'm a huge fan of just kind of creating more adaptability in your body. And I'm obviously, I was being sarcastic because I really enjoy fasting too. It really stretching your body's limits, but in the best way you possibly can. And I think that's such a cool thing. It's so liberating to try fasting for the first time. And if it works for you, don't continue doing it if it doesn't work for you. But if it works for you, it's liberating to wake up and be able to just go on with your day. And then if you don't need to eat, you don't need to. You're not like everybody else who has hunger pains at 11 a.m. and starts losing energy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Or they start losing their minds. I used to get really, you know, I was eating lots of carbs. I would get so cranky when I didn't eat. It was probably every 2 to 3 hours. Or else I'm a pretty like laid back, happy dude most of the time. But man, if I didn't get food, then I was just a 100% jerk.
That's really funny.
It's not like that anymore though, because I'm burning fat more than I'm burning carbs. So
sure, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's kind of the direction I want to go right now. Is people always think about you got to have your carbs for fuel, you got to have your healthy whole grains. How would you get your energy if you don't have your carbohydrates? And your show is all about being a fat burning man. So what weight do you put towards the macronutrient ratios, and kind of how do you become a fat burning man rather than somebody who crashes every 3 hours?
Yeah. Eat lots of fat is the biggest way to do it. As crazy as that sounds, like I think the English language is problematic in so many ways, and the word fat is kind of a misnomer because, like you said, you think that when you eat fat, you'll get fat. But what happens is, for example, when you're fasting, you're burning fat. Like that's what you're burning. The vast majority of the time, if your body is well adapted to burn fat, that's what you're doing. You're kind of doing it behind the scenes, and that's taking fat directly out of your body. Or if you're consuming it, you're also eating fat. So if you're taking one of the cool things is medium chain triglycerides are a short chain fat to medium chain fat, which is found in coconut oil, and that's something that your brain can use as a fuel for kind of high-performance tasks. So I'll spoon that into my mouth quite a bit. But I would say, like, if someone wants to get started with it, just go low-carb for a while. And it doesn't need to be into ketosis, which is what a lot of people do. That's kind of a hardcore intervention that Atkins popularized in the 70s. You don't need to go less than 20 carbs a day into ketosis. You can just go like 50 to 100 net carbs a day, and over time your body will start to shift from burning tons of carbs to burning mostly fat. And it's difficult to describe if you haven't experienced it, but it's this energy that sustains. You don't get these crazy ups and downs and irritability that you get when you're shoving carbs down your throat. You get this balance, which I would never turn back. I highly recommend people try it out.
Yeah, you guys got to give it a shot. There's that little period of time where it might be a little bit tough at first, but once you get kind of used to it, it's definitely liberating.
Right.
Well, we've talked a ton about nutrition and eating wild foods and stuff. What about your training? I know your training has evolved a lot over the years, just like your nutrition. Why don't you share a little bit about kind of where you started and kind of where you are now?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting because when you look at most people who are in high school and they're athletes, these are pretty much the best bodies, male or female, that you'll ever see, aside from professional athletes, which start to incorporate all sorts of other jazz and drugs and all that. But you look at that body, and that's usually like the best that someone is ever going to look. And there are a few reasons for that. Like, number one, your hormones are usually in pretty good order because you're young. And number two, it's because the type of training that you get when you're practicing for most sports throughout the day is exactly the type of training that's going to get you looking and feeling your best. And so that's what I do. It's instead of doing, you don't see soccer teams running for 4 hours, right? You don't see soccer teams on treadmills. You see them cutting, using all of their muscles, going back and forth, sprinting back and forth. And you see them doing it fairly frequently, but when they are, like if they go back and forth from sitting on the bench, they're like sprinting as hard as they can. So that's kind of what I do. Once or twice a week, I'll do sprints, which for me, and you kind of have to work up to this, is 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, 10 times in a row, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on how I'm feeling. I do that once or twice a week, and then I combine that with long walks. I have a dog, and so I love going outside, and that's actually more for my brain even than for my body. You can, if you're going after a great body, then you can do even less than I do. And then I combine that also with weight training once or twice a week, and I do full body heavy weights if I can find them. If I can't, I'll just do some kettlebells or some body weight workouts, and that works really well for me. You don't have to, I hardly ever go to the gym unless I'm traveling. I don't really like gyms. I like getting outside and really moving my body and feeling great about it. So that's the secret to getting the results, like great results in a short amount of time, is going really high intensity, heavy weights, but not to the point of injury.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you shared that because still so many people, especially in the fat-burning world, it's the buzzword is more cardio, more cardio, more cardio. And we both know how devastating that can be to somebody's hormones, their mindset, and everything. So you're right. That sprint training is good.
Yeah,
you also mentioned walking. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and if you don't take my word for it, I wrote a blog post about it and put pictures. I'm always experimenting on myself. So I put pictures of myself when I was marathoning, and then pictures when I stopped marathoning. And like, they speak for themselves.
Sure.
When I was marathoning, I don't know if you've seen it, Tyler, but when I was marathoning, I had an okay body. I was, I'm 5'9". I was 148 pounds, which is so small for me. And I had higher body fat than I have now at 170. And so I show 1 month later after I stopped running, 50 plus miles a week and started running 5 to 10 miles a week. And then I have I have a six pack. My muscles are showing more, and I put on 10 pounds of muscle just from not doing so much damn cardio.
That's great. I have seen those pictures, by the way, and it is very impressive. I did the same experiment on myself. I did a real kind of strict nutrition program for 30 days with zero exercise just to prove how prevalent nutrition was in the whole body fat loss game. and people were shocked. Oh my God, you lost, I think it was 5.6% body fat and like 10 or 11 pounds in 1 month. So
wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it's fun. You got to love running experiments on yourself, right? Somebody's got to do it.
Totally.
Well, you mentioned walking, and I'm so glad you mentioned that too, because I have a pair of dogs as well. And getting outside and just walking and connecting with the earth is one of my favorite things to do to kind of just recover faster and clear my head. Why don't you talk about kind of your favorite recovery practices and how those can benefit people in their training?
Yeah. If you're not, like these, one of the things that I don't like about, I'm going to pick on CrossFit for a second, because there are a lot of, comrades who are doing that. And what happens often with people is they're like, oh, I'm out of shape. I got to go to a boot camp. And so they wake up at 5 o'clock every morning and then work out for 2 hours or whatever. They do it every single day out of the week. And, they're peeling themselves out of bed. They're all bleary-eyed. Cortisol's way up, totally stressed out, and their muscles are so heavy. And they may look great for a while, but after a while, they're so sore, they're just like, I can't go. And they stop going for a week. Then that turns into 2 weeks, and then 2 months. And then they totally, give up. And that's exactly what you don't want to do. That's burning yourself out. And so you need to kind of follow the way that you feel. Yes, you need to peel yourself out of bed sometimes and actually get yourself to do something activity-wise. But it's really important that you also take a step back and just go for a walk and relax sometimes. If you're not loving what you're doing most of the time, then you're not doing it right. If you don't love working out or doing your little routine, then do something different. If it's not, too many people just have this no pain, no gain attitude about it, and that's something that is completely unnecessary. I definitely encourage everyone to try to have a positive relationship with activity and movement and also recovery. It's so important. The times that you burn the most fat and build the most muscle aren't when you're working out. It's when you're sleeping. It's when you're relaxing and resting, and that actually allows your body to become more healthy and kind of repair and grow itself.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so important right there. I'm glad you said no pain, no gain. Another one of my favorite phrases is no pain, no pain. It's really simple.
And actually, now that I've always been a runner, but now that I don't force myself to go out and run, even though I still enjoy it, I don't get injured anymore. I always had these nagging shin splints or knee issues or IT band, and any runners out there know very well what those things are.
Sure.
I hardly ever get injured. And I'm trying to remember the last time I was, and aside from a couple of little things where you roll your ankle or whatever, you're going too hard down a hill, I really can't remember the last time I was injured training this way, because what you want to do is just get this spectrum of activity. And that's one thing I do agree with CrossFit about. That whole idea is that you're preparing for all these different ways of training, all these different things that you could encounter in, I guess, kind of like a hunter-gatherer type lifestyle. And so you definitely want to switch it up. You don't want to do the same thing every day or even every week.
Sure. Well, I know you are a musician, and I also know you have some really interesting thoughts on how a musician's brain works relative to everybody else's. So I kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the kind of the fringe and see what your take was on how music can kind of benefit you in your daily life and how different movements and things can benefit you in your daily life. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So one thing that I've said before, and I'll say it again, is I would be totally insane if I didn't have music. When I was a teenager, I was going through some really hard stuff, and the only way I could get myself to cry was to put on Jimi Hendrix or Stevie Ray Vaughan and plug in my electric guitar and play as loud as I could until I just broke down and started bawling. That's the only way that I could get it out. And so when I was in college, I was trying to figure out why that would be, and I started putting together my mini thesis, and I started writing papers about how music affects the brain and the body, and also what musical training does to you, what effects it has to you and how the brain of the musician is different from that of the non-musician. And what I found was really interesting because music is something that has never really been explained as a cultural phenomenon, right? It's something that has no obvious adaptive significance, right? Like you can't see a caveman being out there, like one who's jamming on a guitar, being better able to survive than one who's not, right? That just doesn't really make sense. And so there's this question about like where music came from and what it does for us. And so I'm not going to go in great detail into what I found in my book, but I did write a book about it called The Musical Brain. But basically, music is something that is deeply entrenched in who we are as human beings, and it has very close corollaries to both early and modern speech. So when you hear me talking, you're hearing inflection. You're hearing pauses and gaps between the different words and sounds that I'm making. And then there's the actual meaning of those words, which is another level stacked on top of that. And so what music does is it kind of co-opts these pathways that are used both by language and music to create meaning in the sense that like a violin is kind of like a high-pitched scream or a voice, a super voice, if you want to say, because it can go higher and faster. But it elicits a similar emotion that someone singing in that register would have. So I'm kind of rambling on and on, but I love this stuff and totally geek out.
Yeah, I love to geek out on that stuff too, because when you look at once you get to a certain level of performance, there's these other things that you can look at that you can squeeze that last 10% out of and really kind of benefit you more. And that's why I like complicated movements and movement progressions and gymnastics and musical training and all that stuff. It can really benefit your training, even though you don't think about it like that so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you seem to be dominating the nutrition field on iTunes. So what is your plans for the future, Abel?
I don't know. I'm having fun right now. And actually, I've only been, the whole Fat Burning Man show is only like 8-9 months old now. So it's all kind of new for me, too. Although I am doing it full time now. I quit my job consulting, which feels great because, as you probably know, helping people with health isn't something that you just want to like start doing and then stop. It's something that you can't stop.
You can't stop.
It's so rewarding, and you're literally changing people's lives. And so I'm so happy to be able to do that. Down the road, like I said, I'm writing more books. Actually, my girlfriend just did some. They're not tarot cards, but they're like these magical cards that are supposed to predict your future. And the first one that she pulled out for me was author. And I'm like, right on. Very cool. So I'm going to keep writing books. I'm going to keep doing my show, obviously. Blogging also is something that I really enjoy. So I like I told you before we got on this call, I've been on the road for 4 months straight, just kind of taking a step back from my life because there have been some massive changes that have gone on the past few months. And now I'm trying to recollect, filling up my notebook with ideas, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm definitely going to try to help as many people as I can and spread this message that is not always well accepted by conventional people or media outlets or whatever, and keep forging ahead because it's one that people really need to know and understand. And I think there's no way that as a human race we can survive with the way that we're going right now, and I think we have a solution that could help everyone down the road.
That's awesome. Awesome, Abel. Well, you have a book called The Wild Diet that kind of details everything that we've talked about and what you should be eating if you want to become a fat-burning man. Will you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the basics of the Wild Diet are you want to eat real food, and what that means is you want to get as close to the naturally occurring food as you can. So what that means for plants, you want to eat like heirloom or heritage varieties of these fruits and vegetables, which can be kind of hard to find, but if you go to a farmer's market, that's typically what they tend to grow. You want to go non-GMOs. Basically, you want to take humans out of the equation. So man-made foods, foods that have been enabled with by humans, such as the wheat, which have been selectively bred, once again, not for health, but for usually producing a higher yield or profits for whoever's growing it. When it comes to animals, you want to go for animals that were raised as healthily as possible. If you're not eating a healthy animal, you're not going to be healthy yourself. So you want to look for beef, for example, cattle raised on pasture, eating things that they're well adapted to eat. Same thing for poultry. I'm a big fan of game meats. You want to go for the whole animal. Also, look at organ meats. You only have to go back, 50, 100 years to see that we were already doing this, for a long time. This is how people lived long, healthy, happy lives, was doing these things. We just made a bone broth last night with some lamb and the rest of the chicken carcass that we had from the other night, filled it up with a bunch of sweet potatoes and some garlic, some turmeric, and you just feel like a rock star after you eat all that stuff. It's packed with nutrients, and so that's kind of the basis of the wild diet. If any of you guys have ever heard of paleo or the ancestral approach, it's similar in the sense that you want to prioritize eating meats and veggies, but it doesn't go so far as to say that every grain is absolutely the death of you, and that you can't have caffeine or salt or any of these other things that a caveman wouldn't have had in high amounts. It's a little bit more relaxed than that, which is, I think, helpful because not everyone is allergic to the same thing. Not everyone is intolerant to the same thing. It's what I encourage people to do, is try eating a bunch of foods, try eliminating a bunch of foods, and see which ones agree with you and which ones don't. Because every diet should be individual. There's no perfect diet for everyone. There are only perfect diet guidelines. And so that's what I try to create with the wild diet.
Awesome, Abel. Great, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to get on the call and share your nuggets of wisdom with the Garage Warrior community. Abel James, the Fat Burning Man, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Tyler. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you so much for listening to the Garage Warrior Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, if you want to learn how to get fit, eat right, and live the warrior lifestyle, then be sure to visit garagewarrior.com or facebook.com/Garage Warrior. Thanks so much for listening, and I will see you next time.